This person is what we say in Christian circles is having a tremendous spiritual battle. Sometimes instead of drawing a picture of sexual abuse, they may have a color that means I was sexually abused. They may use a color that means I feel horrible. They may use a color that means I want to kill myself. Use a color that says I was tortured. Their whole outlook on life is a very anxious one. And so because of their anxiety, they have a hard time in feeling safe.
Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is Jonathan Daugherty. In past episodes of Pure Passion, we have featured experts in brain science who've described physical changes that take place in the brain as a result of various sexual traumas or behaviors. Changes that result in what we know to be strongholds or addictions. On today's program, we're going to take you even further into one of the more fascinating frontiers of brain research. It's called brain mapping, and our guest, Dr. Jerry Mungandzi, is a pioneer in discovering how the colors we use to represent our physical brain reveal those very traumas and strongholds. So get ready for an amazing ride into the hidden thoughts and emotions of the damaged mind.
Well, my name is Dr. Jerry Mungandzi, and I was born and raised in the country of Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. And I came to the United States in 1980 to study. And through that course of my study, I got interested in physiology. So for my doctorate, I actually went to the University of North Texas, where I studied behavior medicine. And because of the emphasis on physiology, on the brain, I got very interested in knowing if there was anything else about the brain that I didn't know just from my classes. And that's what started me doing the research that ended up into right brain therapy that people know of it today. Science now knows that the brain holds the key to a lot of problems that people have. The first thing that happened to me about 1989 was realizing that when people in a psych facility are not able to verbalize how they feel, what they think, what they want to say, they switch to symbolic language such as drawings, doodling, maybe using pictures, sometimes using sound, sometimes using gestures. And I realized that those were ways that people were communicating. And I started seeing that some of my patients actually, if they were not able to talk to me, if I asked them what's the matter, they wouldn't tell me. They would just say, I don't know. They may start crying, but immediately they start drawing some things. And I realized that the drawings they were having, they were using certain colors that were not by mistake. That's when I started putting some things together to say, I've got to know what these colors represent when people are using them. Child abuse kids, many times they would draw people in sexual positions or draw something that happened to them. And a good trained sexual abuse therapist would know exactly what's going on by looking at the drawings. And I just took it a step further and say sometimes instead of drawing a picture of sexual abuse, they may have a color that means I was sexually abused. They may use a color that means I was physically abused. They may use a color that means I feel horrible. They may use a color that means I want to kill myself. Use a color that says I was tortured. So to collect all this information, I assembled people from all over the country at a conference and gave them a questionnaire to see really if this was so. And then after that, since I traveled a lot, I did the very same thing with the people in other parts of the country. People in Europe, people in Africa, sometimes people in Australia, New Zealand, people in other places of the world that I got to travel to. Now, many times when I talk about the brain, I like to say to people, God made human beings with one brain, not two brains like scientists thought many, many years ago. The reason why they thought that was there's a difference between the right brain, which is the side of the brain that I'm showing here, versus the left brain, which is the other side of the hemisphere. So those two hemispheres used to be seen as two different brains because they're so different and they do different things. With the left hemisphere, we function, we rationalize things, we are able to improve our quality of life, we work with it, we think with it, we solve problems with it. Whereas the right hemisphere is where we have all our emotions. And this is our creative brain, which uses its creativity to help us really deal with any uncomfortable, distressing things that we may have in our brain. Now, I realized very early on that a lot of my trauma patients, they lived in their emotional brain, in their right hemisphere. And if we were to help them, we have to go there where they live to understand what they are dealing with. The only problem I saw was most of our therapies, our talk therapies, they're all cognitive. They are just reaching the wrong side, the side that doesn't need us. The side that needs us is this side. So I learned that we have to develop the same language with that side, which is the emotional language, which is the language of nonverbals, gestures, colors, sounds, things like that. And when I say I do what's called right brain therapy, I simply mean to get into the brain to help even the left hemisphere, we have to go through the right brain and then through what's called the corpus callosum, which is the structure that joins the two hemispheres, we are able to cross over to the left side because those two hemispheres have to work together perfectly. Now, when trauma happens, what seems to happen is that the corpus callosum begins biased towards the emotions, towards the upsetness. So then the upsetness, the emotionalism takes over and it derails the functioning of the left side. And that's why most of our trauma patients don't do very well as far as their everyday life is concerned, because they are in turmoil most of the time. Now, to be able to further this, I realized that I have to study what do all these parts of the brain in the right hemisphere, what do they do? Well, I started reading in literature only to find out that most of what I read was physical things that the brain does, not emotional things. There's very little about it. That's when I started saying to myself, I'm going to have to study this. So it took me 23, 24 years to collect information to know that the right hemisphere does not only help us with what we call physical things, it helps us with emotional things as well. And when I started collecting information, I realized that certain sections of the brain have a lot to do with our emotional life, much more than the brain has to do with our physical life. I know that's, for most people, it's a startling discovery, but it's very, very true. For example, what we call the cerebellum, which is at the bottom part of the brain in the very back of our head, has been known by scientists to maintain balance, physical balance, to be able to make sure that the people who have to do intricate things are able to do that. Perfect balance, which is necessary for us to be able to move and to walk, to do those kinds of things. Well, in my research, I found out that to maintain emotional balance, we have to be able to contain destructive things that are within us. For example, sometimes people feel suicidal, sometimes people feel destructive, some people feel very angry. But if we let those feelings override our brain, we're not able to function. So our cerebellum then takes those feelings and keeps them there and sort of locks them away and say, you're not allowed to derail anything. I thought that was an amazing thing, because every time I see somebody who is struggling with something and I look to see in their brain what is it that threatens them. If they're doing well, whatever it is that threatens them will be locked up there. And as soon as that comes out of there, all trouble starts because of that. So in order to do that, I figured out a way that each person's brain can project on a piece of paper what's going on in the rest of the brain. Now, in modern science, we have brain specs, we have imaging machines, we have MRI machines that take a picture of what's in the brain normally to see the types of blood flow that's going on, the electrical activity that's going on there, also to see if there are anything that's abnormal in the brain. Well, the only problem with that is that that's an external picture. That's taking a picture of what's inside. What I thought of was the brain itself should be able to communicate to us what it perceives. That is not limited to our camera, to our machines, that it has to have its own way. Now, most psychologists will tell you that we have some of these projective tests that we have, where people draw pictures, draw a tree, draw something, and that people begin to project in their drawings some of the things they may be feeling in their subconscious mind. And I took that and realized that if I ask people to project their feelings that they project in these colors in their brain, I might be able to see what that brain is saying, this is what's going on, which is exactly what happened. And here today, what I have is actually 3 brain maps of 3 individuals that I didn't know anything about. I didn't know their lives at all. All I knew was that they wanted me to look in their brains and for me to tell them what was going on with them and how I could help them or how I could direct them to someone who could help them if we found that there were problems in their brains. And so what I would do here is to go one brain map at a time and kind of walk you through what is going on in that person's brain and perhaps talk a little bit about what that person may need to do to resolve the issues that their brain is projecting to me. Chart 1 is about a person. This is a male person. And what's happening in this person's brain is that in their face, which also wraps around at the top of their brain, is a color that is actually telling me that this person is trying to protect themselves, to cover themselves, to have a facade that they wear in their face. And that facade actually in this person is saying, I am really, really struggling. I'm having a lot of problems. I'm having a lot of confusion. In fact, I'm experiencing so much negativity that I feel like something has taken me over. This is what I'm seeing in this person's brain. The way we know that the color says that is by going to the color interpretations from all these people who have said this kind of color means this. Now, I'm not going to tell you what all the different colors mean because I don't know how many of our audience would one day want to do this so I can help them. So I don't want to bias them at all. But here's what I can tell you, that the colors here that tell me, for example, like this person is what we say in Christian circles is having a tremendous spiritual battle. He is fighting spiritual forces that are driving him to do some things in his life that he would otherwise not do. Now, if I were to talk to my friends who do deliverance, who do pray for people, they probably would say, yeah, this person is having spiritual attacks from spiritual forces. I would say that's true. One of the reasons we know that in this brain is that the blackness that we see inside there, which most people know that that can be good. Well, there's a lot of rage, a lot of anger, a lot of feelings of suicide that this person is experiencing. And as a result, here in their front part of the brain, which is their functioning brain, and that little spot that we call the Broca's area is actually the part of the brain that controls our speech and movement. In other words, it's almost like the command center for the whole front part of the brain. So you can see that the command center in this brain is experiencing tremendous pressure from all the negative feelings and feelings of suicide. Well, that happens to be the part of the brain and that color that's there, which represents this person's faith. So you can see their faith is keeping them going, whereas that faith is having to battle the suicidal feelings. Now, when I actually talked with this person, they were shocked that I knew that, because they said, yeah, if it wasn't for God, I would have killed myself. And I said, yeah, because you're having pressure that says you need to kill yourself. And also what we see in this person's brain is that in the very back of their brain, they are containing what I was calling the internal threat. So this person's internal threat seems to be whatever is meant by that color there. Now, from what I know, that color means a lot of family trauma. So this is a person who was abused in their family. Now, what kind of abuse? In this brain, we probably don't know until we look at different things. But the thing we know is that their family experience was not a good one. And there's a lot of shame that this person has. And that shame, if he allowed to be in the other parts of the brain, it would really make them feel horrible. As a result, their brain, to save them, locks up the feelings of shame in the very back of the brain to make sure that the shame does not consume them, because they already have a lot of negatives going on. As a result, what we also see is that in their brainstem, which is actually the physical life that we all have, is monitored by that part of the brain. That's what monitors our hearts, our kidneys, our liver, and all the organs that make life work. Well, as a result, in this person's brain, it means that physically they have not been able to process this family trauma psychologically. As a result, their body now is storing the trauma. What that means is that they're beginning to have physical problems as a result of what happened to them. In this brain, we probably know one of the reasons why they're not being able to process the family trauma. Why? Because as we see the perception part of their brain, they perceive everything emotionally. And even their own self-perception about who they think they are very emotional. Even the way they think in their thinking brain, which is called the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is our memory brain, which does the very primary function of cognitive processing, thinking through things, solving problems, planning things is all done in that part of the brain. This person's brain is run over by emotions. Now, thinking emotionally does not work very well. And when you think emotionally, you are not going to make sound decisions. So as a result, trying to deal with this with all these emotions will just make this person really, really drown. Now, this person, when we look in part of their brain that really controls their hormones, like the pituitary gland, and also their hypothalamus, which actually works together with their thyroid gland, which modulates our moods. That's what decides whether we need chemicals to help us feel better, feel elevated, or feel sad, or feel anxious. A very, very important part of the brain. Well, in this brain, this person is also run by emotions. Now, when I saw this brain, and I knew that this brain was a male brain because I saw the person as they came in. What I saw there's a lot of femininity in this brain, both in the way the person perceives themselves, their identity. They identify themselves as a female. The way they relate to the outside world, they relate to the outside as a female. The way they think as a female. The way they function as a strong person. That's why their frontal cortex is working very well. The way they have their chemicals in their brain, the way their hypothalamus functions, the way their pituitary gland functions, their hormones are functioning as a female. Okay. That is what you call a classical gay person. Okay. Now, I don't know anything about this person, so I'm telling them this is what it says, and they just sit there and said, yeah, I'm a gay man, I actually live with my partner. And I said, that makes sense. And then they say to me, oh, I think I am just a female who is trapped in a male body. And I say, I don't think so. Your body is seen by your brainstem, not by this. This is your mind. This is your psychological makeup. Your psychological makeup is many times controlled, manipulated, influenced by your environment. Therefore, the reason why your mind thinks as a female, the reason why you identify yourself as a female, the reason why you relate as a female is because this brain knows that that's the only way to survive. You need to survive like a female. And I say, don't confuse that as somebody who was born this way. This part of the brain reacts to environment. That's what it does, because right here is what we call the amygdala, which is our response modulator. This is our alarm system of the brain. Its job is to alert the rest of the brain that there's something wrong going on the outside. And the only way the amygdala knows that, it has to use what we call the olfactory bulb, which is this long thing that we see here. The olfactory bulb's job is to pick things out in the external environment that seem to be a threat to this brain. Okay. Now, this one tells us that this color that we say is negative is the picker. So it picks negative things and sends a message to the amygdala, which that color of the amygdala that we see there tells us a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. Okay. So why would this person be afraid? Obviously, if you're having suicidal thoughts going on inside, you're going to be afraid. And what's in the face for this person, they're also afraid of what people think about them. And that's why this is such a big issue for them. Now, when we look inside their brain, in the middle there, this is what we call the thalamus. Well, actually, the thalamus is also the same part of the brain that we call the heart. Not so much the heart that pumps blood, but the heart that decides the deepest things that we have. What I call to people the biblical heart is this one here. And this one is telling us this person is guarding their heart. They are so anxious about what's in the heart. Now, one thing we do know from working with a lot of trauma victims, this seems to be the place in the brain where every memory fragment that is not processed into a story is kept there. This is how I know what is the biggest problem somebody has. So this person, I realize that they are very, very anxious in there. As a result, their whole outlook on life is a very anxious one. And so because of their anxiety, they have a hard time in feeling safe. They feel very threatened by a lot of people. So after I went through this with this person, and they said, yeah, that's me. And I said, okay, if I were to tell you what you need to do, number one is you can't go on in life wanting to kill yourself all the time. That's no way to live. 2, you can't be this anxious all the time. 3, you can't walk around with a ton of these emotions and making your decisions emotionally because you're not making sound ones. And I said that has nothing to do with whether you're gay or not. It all has to do with, to live in this world, to function in this world, you need to know that part of the brain, the hippocampus, was never meant to be an emotional center. It's supposed to be a rational center. So that's what we did with this brain. The very first thing that this person has to do is to deal with that trauma. When we deal with the trauma, this person starts remembering the things that happened to him that caused his brain to start firing this way. And then we can retrain that brain to fire in the original way that it was designed to do. I tell people all the time that if you buy a Mustang and you go alter it and put a different tires, different engine, different everything else, sooner or later, that's no Mustang. If you wanted to go back to operating like a Mustang, you have to go back and put things back the way they should be. When we talk about the use of color in a general sense, there may be variations culturally, but I doubt very much if those variations are that big. Here's an example. If you go to countries where they drive, the traffic lights are going to have the same meaning. And sometimes I say to people, do you know why the amber color, the orange color, is the color before you stop? Why? Because there's an association with warning with that color. In our country right now, if there is a state of alertness, it's in the orange. Why? Because there's an understanding that that's what it warns. Now, that kind of a meaning of colors, that's a universal one because it's a language of the brain. In fact, most of our advertising that we do is based on this. I think whoever came up with this idea didn't want people to know about it so they can understand what it was. But a lot of these colors are very universal. And the way I know about it is because I have clients that I meet with on the internet through Skype who live in other parts of the world, the UK, Jamaica, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and the colors mean the same thing when it comes to representing the feelings that people have.